Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a chilly fjord-side settlement in the Viking Age, somewhere around 873 CE. You're bundled up in layers of wool, your boots are damp from the mossy path, and the air smells like wet sheep and roasted fish. You're not here to raid or pillage. Not tonight. Tonight, you're here for something far more intense. A sheep auction. The sun has dipped low behind the pine-covered hills, leaving streaks of lavender and gold across the sky. Smoke curls from longhouses, and the scent of peat fires mixes with the briny wind rolling off the water. The auction is just getting started. You trudge down a trampled path lined with muddy footprints, horse droppings, and discarded bones. Around you, villagers gather, already laughing too loudly, already a few horns of mead deep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As you pass the creaky wooden gate into the trading circle, you hear it, a thick, nasal voice calling out bids. There's a woman waving a stick at a suspiciously muscular ram. A boy leads a ewe wearing beads on her horns. A trader with a beard like an avalanche gestures grandly to what appears to be a blind goat. This, apparently, is a prize specimen. People jostle elbows and shout in Old Norse. You nod politely, hoping your basic understanding of livestock-related phrases will carry you through the night. Someone pushes a horn of mead into your hand. It's warm. Not ideal. The auctioneer, a wiry man with silver rings braided into his beard, stands on a repurposed barrel. His cloak is embroidered with little goats, and his enthusiasm is unmatched. He slaps the side of a sheep with flair, calling out her age, lineage, and most importantly, how many times she's evaded wolves. The crowd murmurs with appreciation. Sheep, it turns out, were deeply valuable in the Viking world. They gave wool, meat, milk, and manure, basically the four horsemen of rural prosperity. A healthy ewe could mean the difference between comfort and starvation come winter. Historians still argue whether Viking sheep were selectively bred for traits like temperament or just will yield, but either way, these animals were VIPs. You try to blend in. Everyone looks comfortable here, leaning on staffs, tossing bits of dried fish to stray dogs, pointing out the fullness of a sheep's belly like they're appraising a used wagon. There's a kind of sleepy chaos to it all. Someone is playing a lyre off-key in the background, possibly as a form of intimidation. You get nudged by a man in a leather vest who smells like onions and ambition. He whispers, "Don't overbid too soon." That old guy in the red belt? He fakes a limp to get sympathy discounts. Duly noted. A woman brushes past you with two goats on leashes and a baby strapped to her back. You don't know whether to smile or salute. Nearby, a toddler attempts to climb onto a sheep, and the sheep, very reasonably, disagrees. There's something soothing about all this. The rhythm of the bidding, the murmur of voices, the distant crash of waves. You realize you're not just witnessing commerce. You're watching a community unfold its habits and hopes under a sky slowly peppered with stars. So, now that you're here, among the bleeding, the bartering, and the bone-deep sense that you've definitely stepped in something unspeakable, take a breath. You probably won't survive this. But for now, you're just another face in the crowd at the most important event of the week, the Viking sheep auction. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're wearing something itchy. The tunic seemed like a good idea when you first threw it on. Brownish gray, homespun, just thick enough to block the wind but not so heavy that you'd sweat. That is, until the fibers start working their magic. Viking wool isn't your cozy modern merino. It's scratchy in a way that feels personal. Like the garment holds a grudge against your skin. The threads prickle along your arms as you shift awkwardly in the crowd. The seams rub against your shoulders like sandpaper with ambition. You tug at the neckline for relief, only to discover you're also wearing a collar made of some kind of stiff leather cord. Why, no one knows. Viking fashion, like Viking diplomacy, is occasionally counterintuitive. You look around to see if anyone else is suffering. No one seems to notice. A broad-shouldered woman nearby adjusts the belt over her layered skirt like she's born for it. Her shawl is patterned with dyed wool, indigo, ochre, and hints of reddish-brown. These colors don't come cheap, which tells you one thing. She's important, or at least knows someone who is. Her shoes, made of knotted leather strips, look about as comfortable as boiled bark. You glance down at your own footwear. Someone said these were authentic turn shoes. Translation: they're soft leather sacks that do absolutely nothing to stop a goat from stepping on your foot. Which just happened. Fashion in the Viking world, you're realizing, was less about personal expression and more about function, materials on hand, and showing off your social status. Subtly, of course. Historians still argue whether certain patterns in Viking clothing denoted clan allegiance, or were just, my aunt had extra blue dye that year. The truth is likely both. It wasn't all dreary gray and brown, though. Wealthier Norse folk wore pleated tunics, imported silk trim from the east via the Varangian trade, and even jewelry like glass beads or bronze brooches. You, on the other hand, are wearing one bead, a lumpy green one, that keeps falling sideways down your chest string like a disappointed marble. Someone nearby starts talking loudly about warp-weighted looms. You blink. Warp-weighted looms were the Viking method of choice for weaving textiles. The setup looked simple but required serious know-how. Upright, tilted slightly, and weighted with stones to keep tension on the warp threads, they let you weave fabric as long as a sail, if you had the patience of a saint and calluses like tree bark. It's likely your itchy tunic came from such a loom, though you suspect your version was woven by someone in a bad mood. A group of teenage boys saunters past, laughing too hard and carrying a rolled-up fleece. One is wearing what might be a fox pelt as a scarf. Another has intricately carved pins holding his cloak in place. You wonder if he stole them or if his grandmother was just really into metallurgy. You shuffle closer to the auction ring, pulling your tunic tighter as a cold breeze sneaks down your collar. Somewhere behind you, a sheep sneezes. It sounds judgmental. You begin to appreciate why so many Viking sagas talk about cloaks being flung dramatically over shoulders. It's not just for flair. It's the only way to stay warm when your underlayer feels like it's exfoliating your ribs. And then there's the headgear. Oh, the headgear. Most folks are bareheaded, their hair either braided or wild. But one fellow wears a coif, basically a linen skullcap, that makes him look halfway between a monk and an enthusiastic mushroom. Another man has wrapped his hair in a band of wool with some sort of silver charm dangling at the temple. Fashion. Superstition? Preventing lice? Scholars still debate this. And while you're adjusting the hem of your tunic for the 100th time, an old woman sidles up next to you. She eyes your outfit, snorts softly, and mutters something about rookie wool. She taps her own sleeve proudly. Hers is clearly well worn, but polished with use and likely lanolin-rich from years of sheep oil exposure. She's cozy, you realize. Possibly smug. Definitely warm. Still, despite the scratchiness, you're starting to feel a strange sense of belonging. You look like everyone else, slightly disheveled, bundled against the cold, eyes scanning for bargains. The discomfort of the wool is now part of the experience. Part of the night. And whether you're a visiting trader or just someone who wandered in because the lights and sounds looked inviting, one thing is clear. At a Viking sheep auction, your clothes say everything. Even if what they're saying is, "Help, I'm slowly unraveling." You sniff the mead, and immediately regret it. It's warm. It's sweet. It's also vaguely sour in a way that makes your nose wrinkle involuntarily. Somewhere between fermented apple and something that once thought about being a peach. You hold the horn-shaped drinking vessel a little farther from your face, just to be safe. A man next to you grins through missing teeth and claps your shoulder. First time. he slurs. You nod. He laughs like a man who's seen many regretful first sips. The horn itself is impressively carved, with spirals and little notches worn smooth by years of use. Possibly generations. Possibly not washed in all that time. You take a tiny sip. It's strong. Stronger than your expectations, and possibly stronger than local building codes would allow. It burns your throat, not in a bad way, but in a way that suggests this was brewed by someone who doesn't believe in moderation. You glance around and see nearly everyone cradling some form of drink. Horns, clay cups, even a hollowed-out turnip. That's commitment. Turns out, drinking was a major part of Viking social gatherings. Mead, ale, and beer were the holy trinity. Water was for washing sheep or, if absolutely necessary, cooling off after you ran from a bear. But it's not just about the alcohol. It's about ritual. About hospitality. Someone offers you a drink, you accept it, even if your stomach says, please no. Historians still debate the precise ingredients in Viking mead. Some argue it was just honey, water, and wild yeast. Others suggest herbs, berries, or even hops were thrown in. What no one debates is how seriously it was taken. And then, the smell hits you. Not the mead, but the crowd. Let's talk hygiene. You've noticed it creeping in, like the fog off the fjord. A mixture of sweat, damp wool, sheep dander, and fish oil. You try not to breathe too deeply. Someone passes by trailing a scent that could fell a weak-willed ox. Another wafts past, smelling faintly of pine and mint. That one surprises you. Vikings, contrary to popular legend, weren't completely feral. In fact, they bathed more frequently than many medieval Europeans. Saturday was bath day, and hot springs were prized gathering spots. Combs, ear spoons, and tweezers were found in many graves. Even so, when you pack a bunch of heavily cloaked humans into a muddy clearing beside a pile of livestock, well, nature happens. You overhear two women comparing homemade lye soap recipes. One insists birch ash gives the best texture. The other swears by adding crushed eggshells for exfoliation. You are now both intrigued and mildly afraid. A teenage girl walks by with her long hair braided in intricate loops, fastened with little bone pins. Her skin is clean, her tunic spotless. You wonder how she managed that in a sheep-centric mud pit. She probably has a secret tunnel to a hot spring. And just when you're starting to wonder if everyone smells this way, a gust of sea breeze rolls through. For a moment, the air clears. Brine, smoke, wool. You breathe in carefully and think, maybe it's not so bad. Then someone belches behind you. Loudly. With conviction. Back to mead. You take another sip. It's growing on you. It's warm and slightly buzzing in your fingertips. People around you seem friendlier now, or maybe just blurrier. You realize you've been smiling for the last 3 minutes without knowing it. A man with a mead-stained beard tells you about a legendary sheep that could predict the weather. You nod along. Another explains how his cousin once traded a cow for a flute made of walrus bone. Best flute in the fjord, he insists, slurring the word fjord like it's made of molasses. You're beginning to appreciate that Viking gatherings weren't just about business. They were about bonding, storytelling, sharing warmth on cold nights. The mead loosens tongues, softens tempers, and occasionally convinces someone to bid far too much for a sheep with crossed eyes. Somewhere in the corner, someone starts singing. It's not bad, exactly, but it's not winning any sagas either. You wonder if this is what karaoke sounded like in 873 CE. And as you lean against a worn wooden post, mead in hand, wool clinging to your wrists, and the buzz of laughter and livestock wrapping around you like smoke, you begin to feel oddly comfortable. Maybe it's the drink. Maybe it's the atmosphere. Or maybe it's just that, for tonight, you're not a stranger anymore. The sheep are judging you. It starts subtly. A glance. A twitch of an ear. A prolonged blink that somehow feels accusatory. You crouch to get a better look at a shaggy brown ewe, and she takes a single step back, just far enough to say, "Not you, thanks." You chuckle to yourself, but the truth is, Viking sheep were a serious matter. Their worth wasn't just in their meat, but in their wool, milk, and symbolic status. You're surrounded by decades of breeding, if not art, then certainly craft. And tonight, you're here to appraise them. Or at least pretend you know what you're looking at. You shuffle through a tightly packed group of animals tethered by braided ropes to a long timber pole. Some look anxious. Others look like they've accepted their fate with the resignation of middle management. You pause beside a majestic horned ram, his fleece thick and curled like ancient parchment. His nose is chipped, and he has a scar across his brow. A veteran. He blinks slowly at you, unimpressed. Historians still argue whether the Vikings bred their sheep specifically for wool quality or for meat. What's clear is that they knew what they were doing. The Norse sheep were hardy, small, and often double-coated, meaning they produced both coarse outer hairs for weatherproof cloaks and soft underwool for garments you didn't want to strangle you. You reach out to touch one ewe's fleece, and it's springy under your fingers. Not soft, exactly, but dense. She makes a low meh noise, not in protest, but in mild complaint. Like she's filling out a review form in her head. An older herder standing nearby sees you assessing the fleece and nods approvingly. "She holds up in the rain," he says. "Doesn't care for men with nervous energy, though." You stiffen slightly. "Sheep can smell fear?" He grins. "Joking." You're not convinced. Nearby, a group of boys try to goad a ram into a mock duel with another. The rams sniff each other, lose interest, and begin chewing their respective corners of a shared cabbage. So much for Viking bloodlust. You overhear someone praising a particular animal's fleece density to hoof ratio, which sounds suspiciously made up. But you nod along. These are the things people say at auctions, after all. Then there's the ornamentation. Yes, the sheep themselves are accessorized. One ewe has beads braided into the wool behind her ears. Another wears a tiny bell made from hammered bronze. "That one belonged to my grandmother," the seller says proudly. You're unsure if he means the sheep or the bell. And just like in human circles, aesthetics matter. A bright white coat, symmetrical horns, a confident gait, these are prized traits. You watch as a man inspects a lamb's hooves with a reverence usually reserved for relics or newborns. Sheep beauty standards, it turns out, are a real thing. Symmetry, wool fullness, ear shape. Buyers whisper these like magic words. You catch phrases like tight curl definition and well-sprung ribs. You have no idea what that means, but you nod wisely and stroke your chin. One curious ram trots up and stares at you, unblinking. You stare back. He sneezes, then immediately loses interest and wanders off toward a half-eaten cabbage. You feel like you just failed a very odd interview. There's a man nearby trying to sell what might be the ugliest sheep you've ever seen. It has an underbite, one ear that sticks out sideways like a rudder, and patches of fleece missing in geometric patterns. "She's got spirit," he insists. You almost believe him. At the edge of the pen, a woman polishes her sheep's hooves with a damp rag. She catches your look. "Presentation matters," she says. "No one wants a muddy ewe unless they're blind or desperate." You smile, mostly because you're unsure which category you fall into. In truth, the sheep are calm, even regal in their own woolly way. And standing here, ankle-deep in straw and old mud, you realize there's a strange dignity to this event. Not just the people, but the animals. A mutual understanding, forged over centuries. These creatures fed families, clothed generations, even sailed across oceans with their human counterparts. So, when another sheep looks you dead in the eyes with an expression that can only be described as mild disappointment, you straighten up a little. You nod back. Because here, at the Viking sheep auction, respect is earned, sometimes from the people, sometimes from the livestock. Behind the ale tent, deals get weirder. You step out of the main auction ring to clear your head. Too many sheep, too many sneezes, too much mead humming behind your eyeballs. You duck around the side of a canvas ale tent, its flap held open with a spear stuck into the ground. That feels dramatic, maybe even excessive. But then again, this is the Viking Age. What greets you out back is a different kind of marketplace. Quieter, shadier, literally and figuratively. There are no auctioneers out here, just murmured conversations, the clink of coin pouches, and the occasional shout of, "That's not the goat I was promised." A wiry man in a cloak the color of pond water is showing a trader something wrapped in sealskin. It's about the size of a large turnip. You catch a glimpse. It's a carving. A small idol. Maybe a fertility charm? He says something about blessing your livestock. The buyer snorts, hands over a string of bronze rings, and tucks the object into his belt pouch. The deal is done in 3 grunts and a handshake that looks more like a wrist wrestling match. Another man is unspooling wool thread between his fingers like he's checking its aura. He mutters about blood in the dye, and you pretend not to hear. Then you see it, an argument brewing near the barrels. A shepherd with a noticeable limp is red-faced, waving his arms. "That's my goat," he insists. "She was stolen last moon cycle." His opponent, younger, calmer, takes a long sip from a drinking horn and shrugs. "She walked into my pasture. The gods have spoken." The goat in question stands between them, utterly indifferent, chewing something unidentifiable. Probably crucial legal evidence. You glance back toward the main ring. There's order there. Rules. Public shame if you try to pass off a lame sheep as spirited. But here, it's all barter, bravado, and vaguely mystical reasoning. You edge closer to a woman laying out small bundles of herbs tied with fish gut string. "For easing lamb birth," she says. "And headaches. And mother-in-law visits." You raise an eyebrow. She winks. One man, large, soft-spoken, with hair like wild straw, leans over and whispers something to a cloaked figure holding a long walking stick. There's a flash of silver. The cloaked figure nods, then slips away into the night, whistling low. You get the distinct feeling someone just bought a priest, or at least a monk, or maybe a particularly literate sheep. This isn't entirely surprising. Vikings, while usually thought of as axe-swinging maniacs, were also practical. A monk could read, write, keep records. Useful if you're managing livestock counts across fjords and generations. Or just want someone to draw a flattering rune about your glorious sheep-breeding lineage. Historians still debate how much illicit trade happened at public events like this. Was it all strictly business in front, party in the back? Or was the whole thing one big flexible gray area? Most likely, it was both. Humans haven't changed that much. You sidestep a woman leading what looks like a blindfolded chicken and a duck with a ribbon tied around its neck. You don't ask questions. You just move aside. Someone beckons you closer. You hesitate, then drift over. The man smiles, one of those thin, knowing smiles you never trust in stories or real life. He opens a sack. Inside, teeth. Lots of teeth. Not human, thankfully. Boar tusks, dog canines, a few deer molars. Talismans, he says. For courage. You nod as if to say, "Ah, of course, tooth courage." You decline. A few steps later, someone offers you a weather rock. It's literally a rock on a string. If it's wet, it's raining, the seller says. If it's warm, you're near a fire. You almost admire the honesty. Then, behind a barrel, you spot a figure squatting low, gesturing someone closer. A very pale hand extends with a finger to their lips. Quiet. You lean in. They open a small leather pouch. Inside are scribbled bits of what looks like Latin, Roman, Christian scripture. Loot, you realize. Loot, or maybe something more sacred. The seller offers no explanation. Just a price. 1 healthy lamb. You don't even ask what passage it's from. You just back away slowly. As you return to the main ring, you realize, behind every orderly auction is a whole other ecosystem of favors, secrets, and goat-based drama. Not everything has a price tag. Some things have a story, a superstition, or a debt attached. And in the world of Vikings, that's often worth more. One last glance over your shoulder shows the one-eyed shepherd from earlier exchanging what appears to be a fishhook, a wool cap, and a long stare for something wrapped in cloth. A deal sealed without words. You step back into the lantern light, mead horn in hand, fleece on your boots, and a dozen unspeakable deals buzzing in your ears. You haven't bought a sheep yet, but you might have learned a thing or two about how to sell one. The bard forgets the words. It starts with a drumbeat. Soft at first, just the hollow knock of a hand against stretched hide. You turn to find a small crowd gathering near a flickering torch, where a man in a fur-trimmed cloak stands atop an overturned crate. His beard is braided into 4 tiny forks, each tipped with a bell. He shakes his head once, and the jingling announces him like royalty, or at least entertainment. The man raises his arms dramatically and says, "Gather round, for tonight I bring you the tale of Ragnar the ram tamer." A few people cheer. One sheep bleats, unenthusiastically. The bard begins well enough. His voice lilts like wind over water. He speaks of mountains and monsters, of a man who wrestled an entire flock into obedience using only song and stubbornness. You're just beginning to enjoy it when he falters. A pause. A long one. He glances upward, then down. And then Ragnar, he said to the sheep. Silence. Someone coughs. Another shouts, "The sheep bit him, you fool." The bard scowls, mutters something under his breath, and continues, but not from the same story. Now he's talking about Thor's goat chariot, which is a different tale altogether and involves significantly more lightning than wool. He stumbles again. This time, it's the rhythm that goes. His drumbeat turns uneven. His rhyme scheme unravels like a poorly woven scarf. He mumbles. And so Ragnar stood bold and brave with something, a cave? A child nearby starts giggling. The bard pretends not to hear. And then, in a moment of sheer desperation, he reaches into his bag and pulls out a chicken. Yes, a chicken. The bird looks surprised to be here. This, he declares, holding the chicken aloft, is the oracle of Beeknir. She shall finish the tale. He points the chicken toward the crowd. The chicken blinks. Someone claps politely. The bard begins making squawking noises, interpreting each cluck as a word from the gods. Cluck, he says. Ragnar wrestled. Cluck. The cave was filled with fire. Cluck. He survived on boiled moss and goat breath. The crowd is, surprisingly, into it. You learn something important at that moment. Vikings loved a good story. Even a bad story, delivered with flair, could win favor. Skalds, these Norse poets, were more than entertainers. They were memory keepers, ego strokers, reputation makers. Their rhymes and kennings stitched glory into the fabric of a hero's name. Historians still debate how much of Viking oral tradition was memorized versus improvised. Some say skalds followed strict metrical forms like Drakvate, while others argue there was room for creativity, especially when chickens were involved. Your thoughts are interrupted by the chicken attempting escape. It flutters to the ground with a disgruntled squawk and bolts under a hay cart. The bard dives after it, knocking over his drum in the process. The crowd erupts into laughter. Someone tosses a coin. Someone else tosses half a turnip. The bard returns, panting, chicken under one arm. And that, he declares, is how Ragnar tamed the final beast. You find yourself clapping. So does everyone else. Nearby, a man in a faded green tunic leans over and mutters, "He's better than last year." That time, the goose bit him mid-rhyme. You grin. Suddenly, the bard seems quite professional. As the crowd disperses, people talk about the story. Not the one that was meant to be told, but the one that actually happened. And that, you realize, might be the real point. In a world where most folks couldn't read, where winters were long and legends even longer, stories were currency. They carried lessons, warnings, jokes, and family names. Even if the teller forgot the words, or replaced them with poultry. The bard passes you, sweat on his brow and pride in his step. "I meant to forget the middle," he says, winking. Suspense. You nod. The chicken clucks. Somewhere beyond the torches, a sheep lets out a drawn-out baa as if offering a review. It's hard to tell if it's applause or insult. Either way, the night goes on, and the stories, whether remembered or invented on the spot, weave into the warm fabric of the Viking sheep auction. Some told in verse, some in cluck, all in good fun. A surprise bid from a one-eyed farmer. You're finally ready to make a move. You've been watching a speckled ewe for a while now. Broad-shouldered, calm demeanor, fleece like soft cloud mixed with old rope. She's not fancy, but there's something about her you trust. And after everything, the bard's chicken, the mead, the judging sheep, you feel oddly confident. This is your moment. You raise your hand, casually, like you've done it before. Like you belong here. The auctioneer, now standing atop a slightly higher barrel. Why is it taller? No one knows. Points your way and bellows a number. Before you can nod, a sharp voice cuts through the crowd. "I'll match that, and add a sack of dried lingonberries." You turn, and there he is. The one-eyed farmer. He's built like a tree stump that survived a storm. His cloak is patched with what might be sailcloth, and his leather belt carries a knife, a horn, and yes, a sprig of mistletoe. You're not sure if that's magical, medicinal, or just festive. His one eye, ice blue, unblinking, locks with yours. He grins, showing exactly one gold tooth. "I raised that ew's mother," he says. "Fed her spruce needles and seaweed. Best fleece on the coast." The crowd murmurs. Several people nod with interest. One person audibly says, "Ooh." You're not sure if that's good or bad. You counter. "I'll offer 3 wool blankets and a smoked trout." That gets attention. A woman behind you mutters, "Must be desperate." The one-eyed man doesn't flinch. He lifts his arm slowly, then slams a worn leather pouch onto the auction platform. It jingles, metal inside, coins, or nails. Either could work. And, he adds, "I'll throw in a story." That gets everyone's attention. See, stories aren't just entertainment here. They're status. A story told in the right setting can raise a man standing faster than a ship full of silver. A story told at a sheep auction? That's essentially currency. The auctioneer raises an eyebrow. What kind of story? "A true one," says the farmer. "About a raid that never happened and a sheep that saved a village." You're tempted, But you're not done yet. I'll throw in a charm, you say, reaching into your pouch and pulling out a bone carving you acquired, possibly by accident, from the shady tent area earlier. You hold it up like a wizard presenting a talisman, for warding off foot rot. Someone gasps. You think it might be sarcasm, or admiration. The crowd is fully invested now. You and the one-eyed man are center stage in a battle of prestige, barter, and bravado. He squints at your charm, nods respectfully, then raises a single weathered finger. I'll up it with a wager, he says. 1 round of sheep trivia. The auctioneer blinks. Sheep trivia? 3 questions, the farmer explains. Loser pays the difference in honeycomb. The crowd eats it up. You step forward. You've never played sheep trivia in your life, and there's a very good chance he's making it up. Still, you nod. Deal. He clears his throat. First question. What's the most common hoof ailment in long wool sheep? You stall. Split claw. He nods slowly. Acceptable. You exhale. Second, what herb do you seek out before birthing in the wild? You blink. Wild thyme. The crowd oohs. The one-eyed man hesitates, then shrugs. Close enough. Final question, he says, leaning in. I narrowed. What Norse goddess is said to protect sheep? You rack your brain. Not Freya. Not Frigg. Wait. Saga, you say, half sure. He grins. Correct. The auctioneer claps his hands like a tavern keeper closing tabs. It's a tie. The deal goes to our first bidder. He nods at you. But you both pay me in honeycomb. You nod. The one-eyed farmer winks. Next time, we wager goats. You shake hands. His grip is like holding a dry boulder. As you lead your new sheep out of the ring, someone hands you a ribbon. Best bartered bid, it says. Completely unofficial, likely made with fish glue. But it means something. Historians still argue whether these sorts of public trading duels were ritualized or spontaneous. Some sagas suggest full-blown contests of wit and livestock knowledge. Others imply it was just something folks did to liven up long nights. You decide to believe the sagas. Wool, weights, and WYRD haggling rituals. Now that you've won the sheep, though it felt more like surviving a mythological quiz, you're escorted to a side table where all trades are finalized. Here, things take a stranger turn. It's less paperwork, more interpretive ritual. A stooped man with eyebrows like frostbitten moss greets you. He's the weigher, not of character, not of guilt, of goods. He gestures for you to place your offering. 3 wool blankets, a smoked trout, and the infamous anti-foot rot charm, which by now you've decided is probably just a goat-shaped toothpick. You set them down carefully. He responds by thudding an iron scale onto the table. One pan creaks ominously. He tosses in what appear to be standardized stones, though one is shaped suspiciously like a loaf of bread. The weight is off. He frowns. You think it might be a test. Then comes your opponent, the one-eyed farmer, dropping his dried lingonberries and coin pouch into the opposite pan. The scale wobbles like a nervous squirrel. Neither side tilts definitively. The crowd waits, breath held, as the weigher reaches under the table and produces a piece of dried fish. He slaps it dead center across both pans. Balance achieved. Somehow, that's the deciding factor. You nod solemnly, as if this all makes perfect sense. This is the Viking idea of fairness. Symbolic weights, shared judgment, and maybe a dash of theatrical flair. Historians still argue whether these balancing rituals had legal power or were just a way to keep trading festive and chaotic. Either way, they worked. most of the time. But wait, the trade isn't over yet. A woman, wearing 5 brooches and 1 very expressive eyebrow, appears and points to the charm. "You must riddle for that," she says. "Pardon," she explains. Certain items, especially those with luck or WYRD properties, must be proven. Not in craftsmanship, in wit. She clears her throat and recites, "I am born of bone, but not from flesh. I drive away rot with a whispered breath. Hung on rope or hidden tight, I ward your steps in day and night. What am I?" You glance at the charm. You glance at the charm's shape. You glance at the rapidly forming crowd. You muster your most confident voice and reply, "I am the lucky hoof tooth." A beat. The crowd erupts with laughter and a few surprised claps. The woman smiles, then gives a formal nod. Acceptable. Someone behind you mutters, "He's quick," or "lucky." Either will do. As the trade is finalized, you receive a wooden token. It's stamped with the symbol of a spiral-horned sheep, proof of purchase. It jingles when you shake it. You're not sure what it's worth, but you tuck it into your belt anyway, because apparently you're the kind of person who now carries official sheep tokens. Then comes the final ritual. Spit and slap. You and the one-eyed farmer both spit, politely to the side, and then slap hands. The slap rings out across the clearing. Deal sealed. The farmer leans in. She likes seaweed and warm rocks. Don't let her near turnips. Makes her mean. You nod, eyes wide, as if you've just been handed the ancient secret to sheep immortality. Your new you, meanwhile, is busy licking the wooden token tied to your belt. You consider this a positive sign. As you walk away, you pass another trading table where a man is arguing over the relative value of a goose with an unusually long neck. The weigher holds up a turnip and a rock, weighing them against each other. You hear, "It's not just a goose, it sings when drunk," and decide to keep moving. You tuck the charm back into your pouch, now fully convinced it's magical, or at the very least, conversationally powerful. Somewhere in the dark, someone starts singing again. Off-key, of course. And though you're tired, your tunic's still itchy, and your boots squelch unpleasantly, you feel oddly triumphant. You've traded, haggled, riddled, and survived the full bureaucratic dance of Viking commerce. You didn't just buy a sheep. You passed the test of the WYRD. The firelight flickers on tall tales. After the weighing, trading, and ritual riddling, you're led to the communal fire, a great roaring blaze that casts flickering shadows over the crowd. The sheep, now restless and curious, cluster near the edges, their wool catching the firelight like golden clouds. You find a spot on a smoothed log, nestled between a pair of traders who smell of pine resin and smoked fish. They nod politely but don't speak much. There's an unspoken rule about letting the fire stories unfold uninterrupted. A man with a thick beard and eyes sharp as flint stands up and clears his throat. He's the fire storyteller tonight, the designated keeper of history, legend, and the occasional exaggeration. He opens with a slow smile. "Let me tell you of Thorfinn's lost sheep and the sea serpent." His voice is low and steady, weaving through the cold night air. You lean in, drawn by the cadence as much as the content. According to him, Thorfinn was a sheep farmer who lost a prized ram to a sea serpent, not through battle, but through sheer stubbornness. The serpent, the story goes, was a creature of fog and waves, rumored to guard the fjord entrance. Thorfinn, desperate to reclaim his ram, ventured into the mist with only a crooked staff and a handful of salted fish. The tale grows with every telling. Fog thickens, the serpent's eyes glow like embers, the ram bleats warnings from a distant rock. You're captivated. The storyteller's voice drops lower, rhythm slowing like the waves themselves. He pauses, then smiles gently. Historians still debate whether this was just a metaphor for lost sheep or a real event. But we know the sea can swallow both sheep and men, sometimes without leaving a ripple. The crowd murmurs thoughtfully. One of the traders comments softly, "Or maybe the serpent was just a whale with bad breath." Laughter ripples around the fire. The storyteller continues, now shifting to sheep symbolism in Norse mythology. You learn about Eir, the goddess of healing, who was said to watch over livestock health, and about the sacred sheep used in sacrifices. They will dyed with ochre to symbolize life and renewal. You remember the charm from the shady tent and wonder if it was connected to these beliefs. As the night deepens, you feel a warm calm spread. The crackle of fire, the soft murmur of voices, the rhythmic bleats from nearby sheep, it all blurs into a comforting lullaby. You realize these stories aren't just entertainment. They're a way to connect, to remember, to pass time when the dark stretches long and cold. Someone nearby starts humming an old tune. Others join in softly, voices weaving through the night like threads. You close your eyes briefly and picture the sea serpent, the lost ram, the firelight dancing across ancient faces. You think of the sheep you now own, the one-eyed farmer's advice, the riddles, the mead. And you realize something. This night, with all its odd rituals and stories, is more than a market. It's a gathering of lives intertwined by wool, wind, and whispered legends. You let out a slow breath, the kind that lets your shoulders drop and your mind settle. The sheep rustle in the straw. The fire pops and crackles. The stories flow, unbroken, into the dark. The secret language of Viking sheep. You lean closer to a group gathered near a pile of hay, where a wiry woman with sharp eyes is speaking in a low voice. Her hands move quickly, weaving invisible patterns in the air. She says something about the eyes and ears being the key to understanding sheep moods. You listen intently. Apparently, Vikings had a kind of sheep language, not spoken but read, through subtle signs like tail flicks, ear twitches, and vocalizations. You try to imagine a flock having secret conversations. It sounds like early social media, only fluffier. The woman explains that shepherds used these signals to predict behavior, when a ewe was about to lamb, or when a ram was feeling aggressive. Some signals were universal. Others varied between regions and clans. Historians still debate how widespread this knowledge was. Some argue it was common folk wisdom, passed down orally, while others think it was a specialized skill learned by a select few. You spot a boy nearby imitating a sheep's bleat with remarkable accuracy. The woman chuckles and says he's the best interpreter in the village, though you suspect he's just loud. She points to a ram pawing the ground. He's annoyed, territorial. Sure enough, the ram snorts and shoves another sheep aside. You try to mimic the signals, raising your eyebrows, twitching your ears, awkward, and giving a tentative meh. No response. Probably best. The woman offers you a small carved whistle shaped like a sheep's head. For calling, she says. Soft and gentle, not loud like thunder. You tuck it in your belt, wondering if it actually works. Nearby, a man recounts a story of a sheep that warned its owner of an approaching raid by refusing to eat. You smile, because that sounds like the original home security system. The group talks about sheep as companions, more than just livestock. They were part of the family, sometimes named, and certainly cared for. You recall the sheep decorated with beads and bells. It's not just flair, it's identity. You realize these subtle communications helped survival. In harsh climates, knowing when a sheep was sick or stressed could mean the difference between life and death for a household. As the conversation drifts, you reflect on how easy it is to overlook the silent bonds between humans and animals, especially when those animals are quietly judging you from their straw beds. You make a mental note to pay closer attention next time you see a sheep. Moonlight markets and sheep-shaped shadows. The auction's pace slows as the moon rises higher, casting long silver beams over the sheep pens. Shadows stretch and twist, making the animals look like furry giants prowling through misty forests. You blink and wonder if the sheep are conspiring. Around you, the crowd grows quieter, conversations turning hushed and reflective. The bright fires burn lower, and the crackling embers throw gentle warmth into the cool night air. You notice a small group gathered near a lantern, whispering about old sheep legends. One elderly woman recounts the tale of the moon sheep, a mystical creature said to wander the hills on nights like this. Its wool shimmers with moonlight, and it's believed to bring good fortune to anyone lucky enough to spot it. The group laughs softly, but their eyes hold a hint of belief. Folklore here is never just story, it's woven into daily life, giving meaning to the ordinary. Nearby, a shepherd strokes his ram's neck, humming a tune you recognize from earlier. You realize it's a calming chant, meant to soothe restless animals and people alike. Historians still argue how much these rituals influenced Viking farming practices. Were the stories merely entertainment, or did they shape how the people treated their flocks and land? As you watch, a dog trots through the pens, herding sheep with gentle nips and low growls. The bond between her and the shepherd is clear, a silent partnership built on trust and understanding. You take a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill your lungs. The scent of pine, earth, and faint mead lingers, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. The auction might be winding down, but the night's magic is just beginning. You settle onto a bale of hay, the softness surprising beneath your weight. The sheep huddle nearby, their gentle breaths mingling with the whisper of the wind. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the chorus of nocturnal sounds, rustling wool, distant laughter, the soft crackle of dying fires. Somewhere, a lone flute plays a slow, melancholy tune. The world feels vast, ancient, and quiet, ready to lull you deeper into sleep. Straw mattresses and the scent of seaweed. As the auction winds down, you're invited to rest in the longhouse adjacent to the pens. Inside, the air is thick with a mingled sense of dried seaweed, burning peat, and freshly sheared wool. You sink onto a mattress piled high with straw and covered with a coarse linen sheet, hard, but better than the frozen ground outside. The low hum of voices fills the space as traders, farmers, and their families settle in for the night. You hear the soft clinking of wooden cups and the occasional laughter that rises and falls like the tide. A woman nearby unwraps a bundle of seaweed, rubbing it between her fingers before tossing it into a small fire pit. The smoke curls upward, sharp and briny, mingling with the peat smoke to create an earthy aroma that's oddly comforting. You learn that seaweed wasn't just for cooking. It was used as bedding material and even as a remedy for sore muscles. Its saltiness kept pests at bay, and the Vikings valued it as a versatile gift from the sea. Historians still debate how widespread these uses were across Viking settlements. Coastal communities likely had easier access and more reliance on seaweed than inland farms, but the evidence suggests a deep knowledge of natural resources. You pull your cloak tighter as a soft melody begins, a lullaby sung by an elderly woman, her voice steady and soothing. The song tells of distant shores, of journeys taken and lives lived under the northern lights. As the music flows through the room, you feel your body relaxing, the tension of the day melting away. The straw beneath you is rough but warm, the seaweed smoke gentle in your nostrils. You drift between wakefulness and sleep, the stories, scents, and sounds weaving a tapestry of ancient life around you. Outside, the wind carries the faint bleating of sheep, a reminder of the day's events and the bond between human and animal that endures. You breathe deeply, sinking deeper into the straw mattress, comforted by the timeless rhythms of this Viking night. The morning barter and the smell of fresh peat. You awaken slowly, the first pale light filtering through narrow slits in the longhouse walls. The air is cool but carries the warm, earthy scent of peat fires smoldering outside. You stretch, the straw mattress creaking beneath you, and notice the faint aroma of fresh bread baking nearby. Outside, The sheep are restless again, bleating softly as farmers prepare for the morning's final bartering before the auction ends. You join the crowd near a wooden table laden with woven baskets filled with honeycomb, smoked fish, and bundles of dried herbs. A stout woman, her hands strong and scarred, gestures toward a pile of hand-woven ropes. "Good for leading sheep through rocky paths," she explains, her voice calm but firm. Nearby, a man carefully unwraps a bundle of wild garlic, promising it keeps sheep healthy through harsh winters. You overhear a debate about the best peat for heating longhouses, a surprisingly passionate discussion involving color, scent, and burn time. The subtle differences, you realize, could mean warmth or frostbite during a brutal winter. Historians still argue how much peat influenced Viking settlement patterns. Some believe access to quality peat was as valuable as proximity to water or fertile land. After all, a cold longhouse was a dangerous longhouse. You watch as a group of children chase a clumsy lamb through the mud, their laughter bright and unrestrained. Their innocence contrasts sharply with the pragmatic trading around them. Nearby, an elderly man recounts how his family once used seaweed as a fertilizer, enriching the soil and improving crop yields. The knowledge passed down through generations, blending the wisdom of land and sea. As the sun rises higher, the final trades are made. You clutch your sheep's tether, now feeling less like a stranger and more like a participant in this timeless dance. The auction is ending, but the stories, scents, and camaraderie will linger long after the last coin changes hands. You take a deep breath of peat and pine, savoring the moment before the day begins anew. Farewells wrapped in wool and warmth. The market square is alive with the soft murmur of farewells. Traders and farmers begin gathering their belongings, folding up cloth, stacking crates, and corralling sheep back into pens or carts. The air feels lighter now, infused with quiet satisfaction and lingering warmth from the long night's camaraderie. You find yourself exchanging nods and smiles with faces you barely knew hours ago but somehow feel connected to now. A boy with freckled cheeks presses a small woolen pouch into your hand. A gift, he says, to protect your new sheep from the coming cold. You tuck it into your pocket with gratitude. Nearby, the one-eyed farmer from your bidding duel stands smoking a slender pipe, the smoke curling like soft ribbons toward the cloudless sky. He claps you on the back and mutters something about meeting again next season. You hope that's true. The scent of burning peat lingers as the first wagons begin rolling toward the village. Sheep bleat softly, their wool glowing in the morning sun like flecks of gold. The cold breeze carries the sound of distant sea waves, a reminder of the vastness beyond this bustling gathering. Historians still argue whether these farewells were as bittersweet as they sound, or if the Viking spirit always leaned toward the next adventure without looking back too long. But here, in this moment, you feel the weight of history and friendship. A woman nearby sings a soft farewell song, her voice trembling but resolute. It's a melody about journeys and returns, about wool and wind, about the steady heartbeat of the land. You breathe deeply, feeling the coarse fabric of your cloak against your skin and the promise of future stories waiting just beyond the horizon. The sheep nuzzle your hand gently. Their warmth grounds you, a reminder of the quiet life continuing beyond this vibrant night. As the crowd disperses, you take one last look around, the flickering torches, the worn crates, the muddy footprints weaving stories into the earth. You step forward, heart full, ready to carry the tales and warmth of this Viking night into the days ahead. Homeward through mist and memory. With the auction behind you, you set off along the narrow path leading back to your village, the morning mist curling like smoke around your boots. The fleece of your newly acquired sheep brushes gently against your side, a steady warmth in the chilly dawn. The air is crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and the faint tang of salt carried on the breeze from the distant sea. You hear the soft calls of seabirds overhead and the rhythmic crunch of your footsteps on the gravel. As you walk, your mind drifts over the events of the night, the strange deals behind the ale tent, the bards clucking chicken, the riddles and wagers, the firelit tales of sea serpents, and the subtle language of sheep gestures. You realize this night was more than a simple market. It was a tapestry of human connection, woven through trade, stories, rituals, and shared moments under the wide Viking sky. Historians still debate how much these gatherings shaped Viking society, whether they were primarily economic, social, or spiritual events. Likely, they were all three at once, reflecting the complexity of lives lived close to nature and each other. Your sheep nudges your hand, breaking your reverie. You smile softly and scratch behind its ears, feeling the soft warmth of its wool. Ahead, the village emerges through the mist, smoke curling from chimneys, dogs barking in welcome. You step forward, carrying more than just a sheep. You carry stories, friendships, and the enduring spirit of a night when the past whispered softly under the stars. As you cross the threshold of your home, the world feels vast yet intimate, wild yet familiar. You take a deep breath, the weight of the night settling like a gentle blanket. And with that, you ease into rest, the echoes of the Viking sheep auction fading into peaceful dreams.